So onto the end game, which was, I feel like, a big bulk of the announcement.
For sure.
Yeah. So just as like an overview, so we have the end game versions, just for beta launch, by the way.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be a lot more later.
Yeah.
We have the end game pinnacle versions of the two trials.
Yep.
So as like fully farmable content. They don't have trees though. Those ones.
They don't have trees, but they do have a progression system of some kind. So you've got the relics,
like relics.
in the Sanctum sequel, and then for the Trial of Chaos, you have the inscribed ultimatums have getting mods from the end. So when you kill the final the final boss of that, which is alleged to be the Trial Master, then you
alleged,
then he'll drop items that can then have mods on them to make the trial itself harder. And there's also some pretty interesting ones on there that we actually were going to put in the video, but it was starting to get a bit long. Which was that you've got the thing which where you've got the bets that you can make of put up 13 exalts, and then you might get double that back if you're able to complete the thing. So those are some of the mods that can spawn on there, and as well as mods that make the actual trial harder as well. So there's things like that as well. So yeah, those two have those kind of like different outside the Atlas tree, because they're not really part of the Atlas. Like you'll get keys for them while you're playing in game, but technically speaking, they're kind of like they scale to end game, but they're not like sort of part of the whole Atlas. Like play them there.
Yeah, so they're their own distinct end game
exactly,
too.
Exactly.
So there'll be 3 roguelike dungeon things that will be
sure.
Like
Or, I mean,
games.
I wouldn't say 3 roguelike dungeons. I will say there will be 3 trials that have various mechanics that can be different.
Yeah.
But then of course you've got the 4 kind of what I guess would say sort of. I don't know. We actually need a name for what are we calling the things that are icons on the.
Because they were called leagues, but they're not really leagues.
Yeah, it doesn't really make sense to call it a league exactly. That is what we call them internally. We just refer to them as like there are 4 leagues that you have that appear there.
Doesn't really work anymore, does it?
I don't have a good idea right now.
Yeah, we'll need to come up with a name for
probably
that.
have actually named it. I just don't remember what it is.
Right. And then you've got the kind of boss hunting kind of element as well. And then the kind of, I guess what you would say is the pinnacle of the kind of boss hunting thing is then, you've got the cities with the lieutenants and then the Uber Act bosses. And then above that, you have the pinnacle boss who we don't want to spoil. Although I did show you a little bit about it just in private before. That one's gonna be hard. Like I know you're cooking up some pretty difficult mechanics there.
It's fun. That's the fun stuff.
Yeah,
because now you don't need to worry about if people can't progress through. It's not a progression blocker. You can just kill them.
It's a progression blocker to difficulty to the higher difficulties though, because once you kill that, of course, then you get the increase of the difficulties, and then it's like, okay, now try it again, but way harder, and then there's four levels of difficulty for each of those for each endgame system like that.
So like apart from the trials, the endgame trials, everything has like its own distinct passive tree, and progression through them is also by doing them.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So we really wanted to prevent the situation where you feel like you allocate points for a certain piece of content and then you feel like you can't do the other content because you're kind of wasting the points that you've got.
Yeah, the lock-in.
And we kind of band-aided that in POE 1 by adding multiple Atlas trees as a way. But I think the solution is much better, where effectively you can progress all of them and you can either do just all on one for a while, or you can just do each of them as you come to them and just add them kind of piecemeal. But either way, however you want to do it, you can make progress on your character. I should say in your league for all of those, because the progress and all that stuff is of course for the whole league, not just for a single character.
Yeah, and previously we used the Atlas tree, I would say very much so, to make sure that we were doing the type of content that we wanted to do.
Yeah, so now it's not so much about finding the content, because that's what the tablets are for.
Yeah.
Now it's more about improving your ability to sustain effectively. Like you're going to want to have those points to sort of get sustainability for the next level up, and we want to make sure that there is sustain if you're doing engaging with those mechanics well.
Yeah.
But effectively you do have to actually to get sustain at higher difficulties. You will need to be able to be making smart choices in terms of allocating and using the tablets correctly and that kind of stuff. It is part of that sort of story of all of that. That's kind of the main thing with that.
Yeah, this idea of sustaining the content you want to do by doing it is a little different to how it's been in POE 1 a lot of the time, where it's like you had to fuel it by going back to maps to,
right.
get your delve juice.
I mean, you're still doing maps ultimately, in terms of
find
but effectively, so long as you're doing the content that you you want to do. You should, and as well, and making it harder. So your build has to be good enough to be able to sustain it. Those hard. Then you will be able to sustain that stuff. And like if you want every single map to have a breach in it, that's absolutely doable by using the tablets correctly.
Yeah, so the Atlas passive trees and the trees for each of the distinct types of content is about scaling the reward and difficulty primarily now.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And what does, I saw like on the breach nodes, it said like increased difficulty. What does that mean?
It's somewhat arbitrary and asymmetric, but it will feel like, for example, some of the difficulties will actually change the boss's skills and how they work.
Wow.
Generally, they'll increase like the level of the area, right? So you get the general monster and life scaling, but arguably to a player that's arbitrary as well because they don't know how that scales. And in other contexts, it might be more of certain monster types, less of others, and stuff like that. It is generally so the small nodes will increase difficulty of the meta content, whereas the notables will increase the reward of the in-map content. But when I say difficulty, that is reward as well. So an example of how this works is like, let's say the boss has 6 uniques it could drop, or 5 or 6 uniques. It can drop 3 at difficulty 0. Then at, say, difficulty 1, it can drop, maybe has increased level or higher item level, some rarity. Now also that, when I say rarity, also do note rarity does increase the grade of items, not just making them yellow or orange. It does make them better yellows or better, not better oranges.
Right?
But it does affect, it affects other things about items than just the rarity.
Yes. And so, when I talk about just getting rarity here, I don't want people to, and POE1 players in particular, to think, they're just going to go from yellow to more yellow. So anyway, and, maybe the next tier will add a unique to the pool, like a more, what we hope will be more valuable unique. And then the next one can do a bit more rarity, something else maybe, introduce a different unique perhaps. And then the last difficulty introduces something ideally, without giving away exact specifics of them, more in the line of a modular unique item, say like Megalomaniac or like Forbidden Flesh and Flame from POE1. So a unique item that is ideally very powerful, very chase, but has a lot of different combinations. Watcher's Eye is another good example, right?
So
a new series of jewels is a good example. There are other uniques that are modular and stuff, and that comes in at the last tier. And so you want to really be getting to that hardest difficulty so you can be getting these like farming for these extremely good, powerful, unique items. But of course, you have the thing, if you're never ready for it, if you try it and you're like, this is too hard, you can always just respec the nodes.
Yeah, you can unspec them away and then not, just effectively decide, like, I've got these points, but I'm not, I want to go back and do this later. And so that ability to effectively configure the difficulty like that, I think is...
So if you're maybe target farming one of the uniques, the difficulty 0 drops, you might want to just be like, I'll do that. I'll do the difficulty stuff later and I'll just farm it at this difficulty. So,
and I think that's a much better way than than some of the systems we've used to scale that in the past. And the nice thing is, of course, with difficulty is that we can effectively use whatever scaling levers we want to make that more difficult without necessarily having to, because we could have been like, you increase difficulty, it's like 200% life or something like that. But by effectively being a bit more vague about it, we can actually like specifically tailor the difficulties of the different tiers, with more specific changes.
Yeah, this like multiple projectile thing you shoot has more projectiles.
Sure, and that kind of thing. So, just whatever we feel works best for making this particular fight more difficult.
It seems like there's a lot more for players to kind of discover experimentally there as they progress.
For sure.
In what ways they're getting harder. And that is going to be different for different players too, where like a different build is affected by a difficulty change more so than others.
Potentially.
And that's an interesting question as well, I think, where how much are you guys pitching these sorts of distinct endgame pieces of content at being like completable by the same build or by encouraging players to make a different build that's better at certain
So
content?
this is a very difficult one. And it's something that we've discussed a bit recently is like, the harder you make the hardest content, the less builds will be considered viable by the players because effectively, like, a build's only viable if it can defeat, like, the pinnacle boss at difficulty 4. Like, that will be kind of the general perception. So we have to be really, like, I actually don't know necessarily what the right answer here is.
Yeah.
We have the ability. I mean, maybe you feel like you do, but I don't think you do.
I wouldn't say I'm 100% confident on it, but I'll have a go at it.
Look, there's going to be iteration here because what we'll see is like, if we find that like, there's only like some particularly abusive, like only the most abusive stuff is possibly able to defeat the hardest content, that we might have to dial it back a bit.
Yeah.
But it's kind of going to be a bit of experimentation, and it's very hard at this point to be able to pitch that because we don't have the crazy history. POE does not have the history of POE 1 to be able to, to know kind of what is the right life value to have on a difficulty 4 pinnacle boss. How do we even know that at this point, really, without,
That being said, though, like the bosses are a lot more skill-based and tactical, right? Like at the end of the day, the gear is to some degree necessary because no one can really make no mistake for some amount of time. So you do have that thing, and you do need to mitigate certain things. But like a lot of these are like very dodge roll tactical, or using certain skills or mitigation tactics or whatever. There's heaps of different things to bypass the things that make them hard, for sure. But I would say it is very much a lot of skill is involved, especially when it comes to some of these with dodge rolling. Like I'm trying to emphasize that quite a bit. Or blocking, if you want to do a different way about it. Not to say you must block, but yes, dodge roll is a pretty key mechanic here, and I'd say we're certainly upping the emphasis on using it and using it well as you get into these higher tiers. But gear is always a way, and combinations of uniques and passive tree and builds is always a way to go, I'm not good at dodge rolling, I'm going to gear around that skill check and become strong enough to defeat the boss.
Or another skill, like some sort of skill that helps you block.
Using skills in the mix is fine. But I would say pretty generally you can take, I'd say any decent character, you get you gear up all the way, and as long as you're good enough, that is a way to defeat them. I would say there's no real hard requirement on doing something crazy niche or out there or complicated.
You're certainly not going the route of like, this boss is fire immune or something.
Oh, no.
Thanks.
No.
We've been through that already.
Yeah.
Excellent.